Okay, so I mentioned before when we were going to talk about markets, what is a market? A market is just where buyers and sellers meet. And we demonstrated a market for a particular good through a supply and demand diagram. Supply and demand that was going to show us how prices fluctuate based on consumers' willingness to pay and firms' willingness to supply. But what we're going to do in these next 4 chapters is we're going to talk about sort of the nature of that market. So, yes, we have supply and demand. And yes, we have firms making decisions about how much they want to supply. And we've said before that the law of supply is that as the price goes up, the incentive, as long as everything else stays the same, as long as the costs stay the same, the incentive to produce rises. And so generally speaking, that's why we have an upward sloping supply curve. Well, where does that come from, and what is that influenced by? So you're going to notice the titles in your, so competition is what we're talking about there, really. You know, when we talk about markets falling into equilibrium, we talk about finding a place where the supply and demand meet, what we called our equilibrium. We said that, like, if you've got too much of something, you're going to start to lower the price. Or if a lot of people are, more money is chasing after the same number of goods, that's going to put upward pressure on the price until you reach that point of equilibrium in your market. But how competitive a market is going to make a big difference. So if you look at the title of the next 4 chapters, we're going to start, and you can think of this as a continuum, sort of. So we're starting here, and let's think of it as a continuum. So here, in this first chapter, we've got something which was called perfect competition. Right? Next, we're going to look at the other end of the scale is monopoly. Right? And then we've got a couple that go in between there. We've got monopolistic competition and we've got oligopoly that sort of fit in between these. But at the 2 extremes, we have perfect competition and monopoly. And this is, just what it sounds like. So what does this represent? Like, how do we move along this? What are we talking about there? Well, we're basically talking about 3 criteria. So we're talking about number of firms, right? Obviously, competition for anything is going to depend on the number of participants. And a market is no different, So, for example, in this perfect competition, we have lots of people competing. Lots. Many. Right? We have lots of firms competing. We're going to the very end, and we're going to say only one. One firm. That's it. That's what monopoly means, basically, is that there's only one firm, one producer of whatever that thing is. So think about the influence of that on the competition. Obviously, if I open a lemonade stand and there are like 5 other lemonade stands just down the street, then, there's more competition, a higher level of competition where there are more participants, as opposed to here. There's only one. I have all the lemons, I have all the sugar, I have all the water. Nobody else could sell it without my permission, and I control the entire market. Now think about that for yourself, just in human behavior. That is going to affect the way that the firm behaves. So it's going to be about the number of firms, but then it's not just about the number of firms. we're going to talk about the product similarity, right? Product similarity. So let's put squares around these. So these are our criteria for distinguishing different types of markets. So product similarity. Here we're going to say identical, right? Because we said perfect competition. Now, you know yourself in life, if you know about the definition of the word perfect, we know that it's a hypothetical concept to begin with. Perfection. What is perfection in anything? It's all in the eye of the beholder. So perfect competition is not the most common thing. We don't really see that very much in nature, but we imagine it as a concept because we want to talk about firm behavior in some particular ways. So the fact that all of these products are identical, not only are there lots of us selling whatever this is, lemonade in this case, all our products are identical. So what does that do to competition? Whereas here it's unique. Only one, or they call it one of a kind. Whatever makes the most sense to you, but they're selling something that only they have, right? So we're going from here, where we've got lots of people, same lemonade. So, if I'm the consumer and I go to your lemonade stand and I don't like the price you're charging for yours, I go across the street, I get exactly the same thing for a lower price. So this is perfect competition. The products have to be identical, right? As opposed to here, where it's one of a kind. Monopoly, only one firm. You find this in a lot of cities and towns where the energy, the electricity is only supplied by one supplier, and that's it. If you want electricity, you go deal with the hydro company. In London, it's London Hydro. You go and you deal with London Hydro. If you want electricity, that's pretty much it. They're the only game in town. It's a unique thing. It's one of a kind, and there's only one firm you can buy it from. Well, imagine the behavior of this firm in this position. Well, to some degree, we could say we can charge whatever we want. What we mean by that is that we can charge whatever the market will bear. There will be a point where a monopolistic firm, which is how we refer to them, or a monopolist, a firm that is operating as a monopoly, there's going to be a breaking point for consumers. You can't reach into people's pockets and grab their money, but there's going to be a lot of what we call, so you might as well call this market power, right? Going up and going down as you go this way, right? Market power. So we have very little market power here. Now the third thing is going to be about barriers to entry. Okay? You're going to read about that, which is barriers to entry. Okay, so barriers are things that prevent me from going someplace. So something that prevents new firms from entering the market. So not only do we have lots of firms, not only are we all selling exactly the same identical thing, but then there are no barriers to entry, which means anybody can join this industry. Anybody can start selling those tomorrow. Anyone with lemons and sugar can open a lemonade stand tomorrow. There's no barrier to entry. As opposed to here, where it's extremely high. Right? So, maybe for now, I'm not gonna talk about, we've got monopolistic competition here. And it's not even really here. It's kind of like everywhere into here. And then at some point, this is going to become oligopoly, right? So we're going to move from lots and lots of firms to maybe a lot, but not quite as many, and then down to maybe 2 or 3, and then down to 1, so we're along this line. Along this line, we've got identical products. Here in monopolistic competition, think of running shoes, for example. They all do exactly the same thing. They might all even have the same basic shape, but through marketing, we give you the impression that there's a difference. So there's some distinguishing characteristics. So they're very close in sort of size and function, but maybe they start to be distinguished down to here where, you might find less, you might find a little more distinction between them. Think of, car companies or whatever. There are differences between the different types of cars and then down to here where there's only one unique thing, right? So we're going we're going up in the uniqueness, we're going down in the number of firms, and then we go up in terms of barriers to entry, right? Things that exist that prevent new people from coming into the market. This is extremely high. So barriers can be legal. What a patent is. If you don't know what a patent is, it's Patent. A patent is where the government gives you the exclusive right to produce something. So think of pharmaceuticals. Patent is granted for a period of whatever it is, 7 years. Nobody else can produce whatever that is. So there's a barrier to entry that's built in by legislation. Another can be technology. And I don't know if I've talked to you about this before, but in economics, we talk about technology being not just the gadgets that we use or the equipment that we use, the computers and the AI and all that, but also processes for doing things, for converting inputs to outputs, technologies which might not be available to anyone. If they want to keep the barriers extremely high, then you can patent the technology, patent the process in order to keep people away from the very process. You hear about the Coca-Cola company that keeps its recipe as a deep, dark secret as to how it is that they make this battery acid that sadly passes as a beverage. That's a deeply guarded secret. That's a technology they're creating a barrier to entry there, right? And then the third thing can just be natural, right? So a natural barrier to entry is where, the cost of buying all the equipment or the capital required in order to get started is beyond what an entrant could expect to earn. So there's a loss built in there, right? Try going out and starting your own car company. You're going to have to invest a lot of money in engineering, in research and development, in building a factory, and hiring a bunch of people and whatever, and you're not going to make that money right away. So you better have deep pockets in order to fund it for a little while, right? So there's a barrier to entry. So like these barriers to entry get higher as we go along. So that's how we're going to identify the market power involved with the firm in these different markets. So a firm in perfect competition has almost no market power whatsoever. Zippo, zilch, nothing. You sell corn, another person sells corn. We can't distinguish the products. Any farmer could just replant their field and sell more corn if they want to move. No barriers really. The corn from here is the same as a corn from here. I mean, there are variations, but that's the kind of thing we call a commodity. Commodity. Right? Look that word up. Get in the habit of looking up these business terms in Investopedia or somewhere if you don't know what they mean. But a commodity being a thing that is basically an identical product. It's something that everybody sells, and no barriers to entry, and lots and lots of producers, right? So these people have no market power. What does that mean? That means their decisions do not affect market price, right? The decisions of all producers collectively are going to influence where the supply curve falls. But one producer entering or leaving the market is not going to make a difference, right? As a result of the fact that in perfect competition I have no market power, what does that mean? That means I can't set the price. I can't set the price. I can't decide what the price is going to be. The price is going to be determined by our supply and demand, right? Right? Our supply and demand. So, whatever happens to the supply curve and the demand curve is going to set the market price, and that is the price I am going to have to accept for my... So that makes me a price taker. So without any market power at all, as a perfectly competitive firm, I have to take whatever price the market gives me. Here we're at the absolute end, right? Where I'm the only game in town. If I'm the monopolist, this demand and supply curve is going to have an impact. Demand is going to be determined by something, is going to be determined by how much money people are willing to pull out of their pocket and pay for whatever it is I'm selling. But I'm the only game in town. My product is one of a kind, and nobody can just enter the market, maybe even without my permission if it's a patent. So I have complete control over what the price is going to be, or let's say the combination of my decisions and the decisions of consumers will set the price. So to the greatest extent possible, I am a price maker here. We try to make it easy for you by making these things rhyme, right? So at the very end of this market power continuum, we are price takers in perfect competition. At the other end, at the other extreme, we are price makers, right? And that market power is going to change as you move along, right? So that's what we're going to look at. And we're going to look at each of these in a little more detail, starting with perfect competition. And we're going to show you why, the general philosophy of this economics is that perfect competition is going to lead to the most efficient market, whereas a monopoly skews the market, skews the price, skews the market symbols, and imbalances the power between the producer and the consumer, whereas the power tends to be a little more equalized here in perfect competition. And think of it the other way. The consumer has a lot of power in perfect competition. The consumer can decide you're charging a quarter more than the guy across the street, so I'm going over there. The consumer makes those decisions. So consumers have the market power. You might even call this the balance of market power. So consumers have the more market power here. Consumers have virtually none up here. Monopoly is a price maker. Again, if you want electricity, you deal with London Hydro. That's it. In the short term. We'll talk about the short term and the long term for everything, but basically if you get those concepts in your mind, then you'll have a clear understanding of where we're going between now and the end of the course.